Hey guys, you're watching TechEdit. I'm Basil, and the Xperia 1 Mark 6 is on its way, expected to launch on May the 17th. The Sony Xperia 1 Mark 5 was a really awesome phone. A lot of you guys loved it, but we've also got a few things we want changed with the next iteration, not least of all longer software support. For example, I'll dive into leaks, rumors, and a wish list in this video. But before I do, got a few videos on the channel in the last few weeks, like the Xiaomi 14 Ultra review, which is arguably the best camera phone out right now, thanks to one key accessory. I've also reviewed the Motorola Edge 50 Pro, which is the best and worst camera from Motorola. How does that work? Check out the video to find out. And Infinix has sponsored the GT20 Pro review. Now, this is a gaming phone that can play Genshin Impact at 120 frames per second thanks to a secondary display chip. So while it's a sponsored video, I'm still incredibly impressed with its performance. So that's all the good stuff on the channel. Now let's get on to the Xperia 1 Mark 6. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the release date. Like I said, it's pegged for May the 17th, but there have been some leaks that have actually suggested it will be launched on either the 15th or the 16th because of a specific Docomo, which is a network in Japan version of the phone. So even before the Xperia launch event, we might be able to see some of the official stats around the 1 Mark 6. One of the leaks has been touted as an official picture from Sony with a big 3 in the middle. It's a teaser effectively of possibly 3 phones or even a new series. Instead of the 1 or the 5, we've got the 3, somewhere in between that flagship and upper mid-range space. I think there's definitely going to be a 1 Mark 6, but who knows? There might be a new version and the one could be dropped. I doubt it. In addition, Android Headlines and OnLeaks released a render on YouTube, which is the phone, the Xperia 1 Mark 6 front, back, spinning around, so we've got it from all angles. And there are a few key take-homes from this render, not least of all the fact that the screen looks a little bit wider. You've got a lot of similarities to the 1 Mark 5. You've got those striated sides and step design, which I really like. I'm holding it in my hand and it feels premium, has a good amount of grip to it. You also have that headphone jack and the SIM card slot that can be pulled out with a fingernail. So Sony staples are back, in addition to that camera button and power button that doubles up as a fingerprint scanner. There's also no antenna lines on this thing, just a weird kind of boxy thing on the right hand side, which is very subtle. So Sony may be dropping the antenna lines. I don't know if that means satellite connectivity or what. The camera surround of the 1 Mark 6 also looks set to be bigger, and this is corroborated by another leak of both the Xperia 1 Mark 6 and 10 Mark 6 camera surrounds. Now, whether that means larger camera sensors, which I'm really hoping for, or just a larger camera surround to give the impression of a bigger camera system, we'll find out. And I'll dive into what I'm expecting from the camera a lot more a little bit later in this video. But getting back to those renders, and the front of the screen also looks like it's bringing back Sony favorites, those front firing speakers, that camera which won't cut into the screen but instead is in the top bezel. Another aspect of the Xperia 1 Mark 6 that has been leaked is the Taiwanese price, apparently, and that looks set to be cheaper than the 1 Mark 5. Not a huge amount cheaper. The 1 Mark 5 retailed for 41,990 Taiwanese dollars. The 1 Mark 6 looks set to retail for 39,900. So again, not a huge amount, but it's nice to see Sony going in this direction when other brands like Google are going in the other direction, charging even more. Is that going to be reflecting a spec drop? We'll find out. That's definitely what we saw in the 5 Mark 5 versus the 5 Mark 4. And the 5 Mark 5 was a little bit cheaper. I'm really hoping though, the key things like that screen, the camera, the design, all feel really great and flagship. What does look set to be super flagship is the RAM, up from 12 gigabytes on the 1 Mark 5 to 16 gigabytes, or at least a 12 and 16 gigabyte model on the 1 Mark 6. So they're pretty much all the leaks that we've seen, but there have been a lot more rumors. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. The first rumor is around the camera, and based on that render that we saw earlier, there are 3 cameras around the back, and one is a main camera, one is an ultra wide, and one is a periscope camera. The rumor is the secondary cameras, ultra wide and periscope, are 48 megapixels, which would be really awesome, matching the pixel count across all 3 rear cameras. This has been slightly debunked by a another rumor, unfortunately, that suggests Sony's bringing back the same camera hardware on the Xperia 1 Mark V, and that means a 12 megapixel ultra-wide and 12 megapixel periscope. But I'm really hoping that the earlier rumor from like 4 months ago that we're having higher resolution secondary cameras is true, because that will improve the zoom and overall picture quality with pixel binning and all of that computational photography. Another ultra-wide related rumor is that it'll have a variable focal length from 14 to 18 millimeters, which would be interesting. I've never seen that before. I have seen an 18 millimeter ultra-wide on the Nubia Z60 Ultra, for example. Ultra-wide, not really, but still, that would be something different and would mean both secondary cameras had a KSP, continuous zoom on the tele and continuous zoom on the ultra-wide. After recording this video, it looks like another really juicy rumor has dropped, and I hope this one is true. The Xperia 1 Mark VI may have a 7.1 times optical zoom. Yeah, this is fresh from Reddit and posted by Sumaho Digest. A user saw a screenshot that is purported to be the Xperia 1 Mark VI with 7.1 times optical zoom as one of the points that you can tap in the camera UI. And that would change the game, because then you'd have the continuous zoom spanning further than most optical zooms on other cameras and would possibly give you awesome zoom results, which has been a limitation of Xperia devices in the past, even with that continuous zoom. So fingers crossed this leak or rumor turns out to be true. Of course, it wouldn't be 2024 without another company talking about AI, and Sony's actually already spoken about how it's integrating AI in its cameras. Now, this isn't how we've seen in Samsung phones and Google Pixels, like Magic Editor and all of that stuff, but Sony has said it's going to apply a digital kind of watermark or like fingerprint ID to its photos so that you know when they're out of the camera they have been unedited. That's expected on its Alpha camera line and also on the Xperia line. Another trend that we've seen from Apple, etc., is titanium, and that could be on the cards for Sony. This rumor isn't really that big a deal to me, but it could mean that the phone is lighter while still being more durable, and I'm guessing we're going to see that waterproofing back as well. And the display aspect ratio is another thing that is very likely going to change. Aligns with the renders, aligns with leaks around the display kind of glass panel. So we're expecting to go from a 21:9 to a 19.5 by 9 front display, which I'm happy about because I do a lot of stuff in portrait orientation, and it'll just give me a little bit of extra width for more comfortable typing and looking at photos and stuff without having to twist my screen sideways. So that perfectly brings me onto my wish list for the Xperia 1 Mark VI, and the first is software updates. I'm really hoping that Sony does a better job, not just of supporting its phones for longer, so more than 2 or 3 years with software updates, security updates, etc. But I also really want them to update in a more practical, efficient way. I don't know if you've ever had it where you've had an Xperia phone that you haven't used for a couple of months, and then you come to switch it on, and there are a couple of software updates, and you have to install each one manually. This doesn't happen with Samsung, for example. You just get a cumulative update. I've spent hours, in fact days, because I just had to go to sleep before I could update the phone, waiting for an Xperia phone to update in the past. So that's one area Sony really could step it up to get competitive. Now this one's going to be contentious, but I really want Sony to ditch the optical zoom on its periscope camera. We've seen in blind camera tests that the optical zoom doesn't deliver as sharp shots as prime lenses with far-reaching zooms. And Xiaomi, Oppo, they've all proven as well that having multiple cameras, 4 cameras, 2 zoom cameras, as is in the Galaxy S24 Ultra 2, does a really great job, especially when you have high-resolution sensors, because that in-sensor zooming can bridge the gap better than a very limited optical zoom as found on the Xperia 1 Mark V, which far-reaching ranges, especially coupled with new AI computational photography, should deliver better results. So I don't think I'm going to get it, but I hope that Sony switches out for 4 cameras instead of 3 and puts 2 zoom cameras on here instead of 1 with continuous optical zoom. Then there's the price. Sony phones are traditionally expensive. Sony, everything is. You pay a premium for that brand name, but Xperia 1 Mark 5s have had to compete without being competitive. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes, they're competitive to real enthusiasts who want to get the most out of the incredible best-in-class camera software on here, but they don't appeal to a wider audience, which could spell the demise of the line, which I, for one, don't want, and I doubt many of you guys do. So Sony really does need to step up the price and bring forward the release. Why? The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 was announced last year, and the Xperia 1 Mark 6 will likely be launching with it. Now that means it's the last mainstream flagship to launch with that chipset, which means it's already launching on the back foot. So in order to appeal to more techies who want the latest tech, not just camera enthusiasts, but also more mainstream users, Sony needs to launch earlier, and it does need to launch a little bit cheaper, which it looks like it's doing. Not sure if that price difference is quite enough, but we'll have to wait to find out. I'd also like Sony to challenge themselves and lean into computational photography a little bit more. Now, I know that's going to really irk purists both within Sony and Sony fans, but I'm not talking about this in their main camera mode. Maybe having like auto mode that is just more competitive with AI zooming, for example, and also HDR effects. Look at what Oppo and Xiaomi's doing. They're doing a really good job of balancing that Leica or Hasselblad tuned imagery while still retaining shadow detail. I'd love to see a little bit more of that from Sony, because when it comes to the pro stuff, Sony nails it. But when it comes to the basic automatic mode, it just isn't quite as competitive as the competition. And speaking of Xiaomi and Oppo, it's a shame we're probably not going to get the Light 900 in the Find X7 Ultra and Xiaomi 14 Ultra in here, and we're almost definitely not going to get a variable aperture. There just isn't room for it in the camera surround size and the renders. Again, hope I'm wrong, but that's just my guess based on what I've seen so far. There are also a few more practical, non-camera related things that I want. For example, the interface has been very similar for a very long time, and things other brands have integrated, like managing my home screen icons by pinching out and checking them and being able to group them into folders and stuff more quickly. That's all stuff that the Xperia can't do. Also, I can't hide the gesture bar at the bottom when I've got navigation gestures active. And I find that the Xperia 1 Mark 5 and 5 Mark 5 are so averse to building up heat that they throttle a lot. And that's especially true when gaming, so they aren't the best gaming phones out there, but also when the battery gets very low. So I'd love some opportunities to override that throttling, which keeps things cool, which is great. A real issue with past Xperia phones. But if I wanted to clip on a fan to this, I'd love a performance mode that actually let me override that a bit more than anything that's currently available on my Xperia 1 Mark 5. So that's been the Xperia 1 Mark 6, all of the leaks, my wish list, and rumors that have been circulating around the internet. We've only got a couple of weeks until we find everything out, so stay tuned to the channel. Hopefully I'll have some hands-on content with whatever it is that Sony announces for you guys. If you like the video, click that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and check out all the videos there as well. Thanks for watching.